Hello my friends, we have lots of the news for today, but let's uncover the dramatic situation which is happening for Russians in Konstantinovka direction. Who would have thought that Ukraine may go on counterattack, quite successful one, right in the settlement, in the southern outskirts. So according to the Russian maps, definitely Ukraine for the last 2 days gained some of the ground, propelling with a gray zone, pushing Russian forces a little bit away. I've took this map from the Russian Rybar military channel, and that guy sometimes says the situation as it is. However, there is still Russian propaganda on his channel, but at the same time he says that Ukraine acts more professionally on the front lines right now. The idea for Ukraine, as he mentions, is to cause more losses for the Russian infantry army. And Ukraine sometimes is even willing to exchange their own controlled territory, including some of the settlements, just to cause more losses for Russia. For example, withdrawing the forces, Russian infantry goes inside and later on Ukraine bombs the infantry with the help of the drones. But in Konstantinovka, I'm quite surprised that Ukraine is sending more reinforcements and even counterattacks behind the Russian positions towards the village of Ivanovo and Kryvyi Torets area. But Ukraine cannot reach Ivanovo just like that, because after all it's quite further away. But for Ivanovo, Ukraine needs to cross the river. Well, in general, I'm not saying that it is the major Ukrainian counterattack. Ukraine will go to Toretsk itself, Ukraine will liberate all of those southern territories. No, this is the tactical operation, a small one, for Russia to concentrate more forces on this attack vector of Ukraine and not be able to advance from the side. So Russia is now more focused on how not to let Ukraine to go deeper in its own defense. And simultaneously, Ukraine counterattacks in two major directions. In Nikolaevka, this is the place just under my image, Russia tried to regain the territories after a successful Ukrainian counterstrike. There were multiple of the attempts even to send some of the armored convoys, but all of them were cancelled by Ukrainian army on the way. So I would say Ukraine now has more success in Konstantinovka than the Russian army. But where Russian army has partial success is to moving not far away from Ilyinovka, and Russians are showing it over here on a zoomed-in image, and also Russia is using lots of the aviation gliding bombs to disturb Ukrainian supplies. But Ukraine sent some drones also to stop the Russian movement. So yeah, overall about Konstantinovka, I'm quite surprised that Ukraine sometimes may even counterstrike. My friends, as usual, a reminder for you to press like to this video and subscribe for the channel. Those two free actions really help this channel a lot. And if you really want to support the job that I do here financially, you may do it on Patreon. The link for it is in the video description right below, or on membership of the channel by pressing button join. Thank you so much. Because of your support, my job is possible. And now, let's continue with the video. And we have new images published by Magyar, middle strikes of Ukrainian army on occupied territory, also disturbing Russian logistics, like for example here it was a train that was hit by FP1 or FP2 drone. They have the same aiming system, so those could be both. This is the place where Russia stored something, looks like a random building, but our intelligence knows the location of the Russian army and they hide in the normal households, multi-story buildings. It is happening like that. Last week, even a Russian FSB office in Donetsk was hit by multiple of the drones, and our guys knew the location of the Russian special services. Here are some of the Russian buildings already burning. This is probably the military base of the Russian army. Well, they say it's Zaporizhzhia Oblast, so the southern part of Ukraine. And about those middle and long-range strikes, we have the confirmation that multiple of the Russian ships and Russian plane MiG-31 were hit. So one ship, there is the other one, kind of big, and there is a MiG-31 placed, I guess, in Belbek airfield. Yes, it was confirmed. By the way, it was in service and not staying there for some of the maintenance. MiG-31 is the fastest flying airplane right now. Yes, R-71 is faster, but it got retired. So MiG-31 is the fastest one, and Russia is using this one to launch Kinzhal missiles. The strikes against the military happen in Crimea, so -3 warships, MiG-31, air defense facilities, radar, Mus M1 and Grad. Russia lost helicopter in Mali. Yeah, about helicopter I reported yesterday. By the way, we have some more news coming from Mali, and those are not so good for Russians. They're performing a goodwill gesture, and one more city is up to get into the hands of the rebels. And about the ships in particular, we have the information. So large landing ship Yamal, large landing ship Fichenkov. Yamal, by the way, was hit 3 days ago. Maybe it was a secondary strike to make sure that the ship is no-go for some of the time at least. Reconnaissance ship Ivan Hurts also was hit, not for the first time. It's the secondary strike, at least maybe the third one. Training center of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Lukamka, headquarters of the radio technical intelligence of their defense forces. Radar, a couple of the radars are mentioned, and MiG-31 aircraft. At Belbek, yes, technical and operational part of Belbek airfield. Belbek is smoking. This is the main airport in western Crimea for entire Russian fighter aviation, and some of the helicopters are also placed there. But mainly it is the base for Sukhoi-27, Sukhoi-35 and MiG-31. This is how the big Russian landing ship Yamal looks like. Russia already lost at least 3 of those. One was absolutely demolished by Storm Shadow cruise missile. The other one was hit by Ukrainian ballistics, .U. The third one was downed by drone boat. Plus, some of the other ships received substantial damages, also mostly by drone boats, and Ukraine is not going to stop. There was the pause in those strikes against Russian Navy, because Navy is being blocked in those bays, but it seems like Ukraine is now focused even on the ships, because Ukraine has lots of the drones in production. So the choice of the targets is not just to hit Russian oil infrastructure, but also Russian military, including Navy ships, which could be used for big landing operations.
Вот, противодроновое ружье, пожалуйста, нахуй. И нихуя не работает, заебись. Это вот, ну... Я почему, смотри.
Russians complain that they have obtained some of the electronic warfare against FPV drones, but it is not working. They complain that it's kind of heavy and very useless. They have orders to use it instead of shotguns, and they were told that it is effective and you must do it. But instead it just lowers the effectiveness of the entire unit. Yeah, they say that it doesn't work. They have different frequencies, but Ukraine is not using those already for a very long time. So this thing is very outdated. What is this headline? Oh, jeez. Yeah, Russians definitely struggle with supplies, and they may do even those things. I cannot even say that openly loud, but you may read it on your screens what they do with their friends on the front lines. This is crazy. This is very bad, inhumane, but somehow Russians, they're still going to take part in the war. Yes, they cannot fulfill all of their losses with the current pace of subscription of the volunteers. Volunteers are not forever. And I guess, well, let me be some sort of the Baba Vanga, judging on the current situation on the front lines, that Russia basically bogged down, and Putin is not willing to change the vector of the war. They want to take more ground. So I think that till the autumn time this year, again, I could be wrong, but let me play this forecast role. Russia will announce a mobilization. Russia will block internet almost completely. They will just allow so-called white list of the websites, which is approved by the Russian FSB, and they will nearly criminalize VPN service usage. And probably, they'll even cancel parliamentary elections in Russian Duma, announcing a martial law to postpone those elections. They might say that Russia has been targeted by Ukrainian drones, we have energy crisis, we have this, we have that, so let's put our not only economy, but entire Russian model on the war rails. And while Putin is alive, it's gonna be like that, guys. It's gonna escalate, intensify, and Putin will be looking for the mid-force to advance on the front lines. They're using kids, those who are brainwashed and, for example, working to produce drone components in Elabuga drone factory. Also, Russia tries to conscript students. Russian regime doesn't care about the future of the Russian youngsters, of the Russian people in general. They need young people to propel forward with infiltration attack attempts. That is what partially is successful for the Russian army. I mean, this type of the tactics, but it goes in parallel with huge losses. Just 1 in 10 soldiers make it somewhere bypassing Ukrainian positions, and they gather and they move forward, and they're always being cancelled. Now those volunteers who are signing contracts with the Russian army, they are mainly old guys, sick, drunk, alcoholics. They cannot move that fast. They cannot move at freaking all. So Russia needs younger army to be successful, at least partially on the front lines. Russian management understands that, and I guess they're gonna escalate to the worst case scenario. That is my prediction. But you know that I was wrong multiple of the times. Yeah, most of the time I'm correct, like maybe in 60 up to 70%. I just give myself this mark, yeah. But I think that Russia has only one way how to continue this war. They need to announce a massive mobilization, and the perfect time for it is this year. Also, the question goes whether Russia may start some of the escalation in parallel in some of the European countries against NATO countries, some of the small special operation, military operation. I hope they will not do it, but that variant is also pretty much possible. We have this information not just from mass media, but also from intelligence services, and we see that Europe is getting ready for the possible military confrontation with Russia. Russians are building tunnels, just for you to understand how desperate they are under those drone strikes. They want to dig down underground to propel somewhere further. But this is very slow. Like, if they dig just with infantry forces, it will not help generally on the front lines. They need a good engineering equipment to make it faster, to be delivered to the front lines. And of course, that equipment would be flatlined straight away. So they are forced to dig. But yeah, it's not a decisive measure for them. I understood that in Vietnam, those Viet Congs, they dig also multiple of the tunnels. But to make a 10-kilometer or 20-kilometer long tunnel, no, I don't think so. All right, now let's go to really a humiliation of the Russian mercenaries, of the Russian army, basically, a private one, which was operating in Kindal city of Mali. Well, not just Kindal. Russia withdraws the forces from two main cities in the northern Mali, and you may see Russian-made vehicles, Kamaz vehicles, rocket artillery systems, and Russians are basically retreating. Those rebels managed to take Russian military bases, Russian positions on those Toyota Land Cruisers. Maybe Toyota Hilux is also there. And Russians basically accepted this humiliation. They didn't want to fight against rebels in those cities, in urban environment, where rebels might have some of the upper hand. And Russia decided to withdraw its forces from Kindal. Russian military bloggers were opposing this decision and what was actually happening for a very, very long time. They say that it's all hoax, nothing is happening. But right now, like an hour ago, I checked their channels and they already confirmed that Russia had to retreat. The evidence was simply overwhelming and Russians had to accept that, even Russian military bloggers. Some of them were telling that situation is very bad from the very beginning, but most were telling, no, it's the hoax. Well, not any longer. Russian officials have already confirmed the withdrawal of the forces. The Russian Defense Ministry even said about it. So the African Corps associated with the Russian Defense Ministry announced the withdrawal of its units from the city of Kindal in northern Mali. The statement said that the decision was made jointly with the country's authorities. They also stated that the personnel continued to carry out their assigned tasks despite the difficult situation in the region. First of all, the wounded servicemen and heavy equipment were evacuated. Yeah, we see everyone was evacuating from those positions. The personnel continued to carry out everything. Yeah, of course. Earlier, the Telegram channel Rebar, associated with the Russian Defense Ministry, refused the withdrawal, that it was happening. But now Rebar writes that this is an evacuation of the wounded personnel, and that the enemy is forced to agree on this humanitarian exit only after suffering heavy losses in attempts to storm Russian camps. Which is hoax. We see it on the video. It's not the evacuation of wounded personnel. Are those all wounded personnel with all of those cars, with the rocket artillery systems? Of course not. So Russia suffered a huge defeat. Yeah, you see Grad system, Grad freaking rocket artillery. It's not the wounded personnel evacuation. You may check out the video. Rebar, Russian channels. You're basically being humiliated in Mali by those guys with land cruisers and AK rifles. And just recall how Russians were happy about American withdrawal from Afghanistan, but they are forced to withdraw, first of all, in Syria. Yeah, they still maintain their bases, but the local leader already said that they're gonna get rid of at least one of the Russian bases, they're gonna make it Syrian one. And here, Mali, Russia loses it. Ex-Wagner soldiers, some of the Russian militants, they're not capable to cope with the local resistance. Yeah, those are religious fanatics, but still, I'm very happy that Russia is being humiliated like that, and Russia is losing its world influence in Africa, in Middle East, I would say elsewhere. And here we have the map that shows us what is more or less happening out there in Mali. Yeah, sorry, Mali is in Cyrillic, but the rest of the names is partially in Latin. So the general attack is happening from Azawad army. This is the green area over here, and Kindal is already taken by their forces, and also Russia started the evacuation from Anefit, well, from this city. So it means that all of the northern Mali is being lost for Russians, absolutely. There were also a couple of the attack attempts towards the capital city. They failed for now, and the fight is ongoing for Sevastopol. Also for Gao, well, Russians are saying that they're on a counterattack in those two cities and everything is alright there, but the same story they told about Kindal and this nearby city. Well, we know that Kindal is successful for Azawad, and this one, well, it also could be successful, I guess. As I mentioned you, Russia also started the evacuation from that place, and two of those cities they also lost for Russians and local militia forces. The situation there is very difficult. You see, Malian army and allies, they control those red territories together with Russians. There are also places controlled by Islamic State, but those areas are mostly deserted, and the cities are being still controlled by government militia with Russians. I would say that Islamic State is not that active in this region compared to Azawads. Azawads, they're really on attacking missions and they're partially successful. And I don't think that Russia is capable to send more reinforcements, because the agreement for their withdrawal from Kindal was that Russians are leaving Mali completely. So they will not be capable to send their reinforcements to protect the capital part and the southern area of the country. They need to leave the entire Mali. It was the part of those negotiations to spare the life for the Russian mercenaries. So what led to this disaster for the Russian army? Well, Russia itself. It demolished its Wagner army. In several of the African countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, with the help of Wagner, local junta took the power back in 2021, 2022, 2023. Back then, Wagner army was really strong, but Putin decided to use mercenaries for not the reason they're usually used. He called Prigozhin to take his boys and to hire prisoners from the Russian prisons to try to occupy Bakhmut city, because his own army wasn't trained that much by the time. And definitely Prigozhin was successful. They occupied Bakhmut, but they wasted almost entire Wagner army that led to the crisis between Wagners, between Shoigu, Gerasimov, who did not really like Prigozhin personally, and they also wanted to operate in Africa, because those mercenaries, they were paid by local resources like gold, diamonds, and stuff like that. The Russian main corrupt officials wanted to get some too, and they were annoyed that Prigozhin was really close to the body. Body, I mean Putin. Well, Prigozhin understood where it all was going, and he lost the great part of the forces because of the confrontation with the Ukrainian army, and he decided to accumulate the last resources and to go to Moscow, trying to do something. But later on, with some of the negotiations, he turned away, and it was his mistake, which led to, I would say, complete dismantle of his own private army and himself. So now this situation and humiliation of the Russian mercenaries in Africa, in Mali, is basically the aftermath of the poor decision-making of Putin himself, because he decided to use mercenaries for the frontal war in Ukraine, and that's how he canceled those, and Russia will continue to lose its influence in Africa. It is already understandable. What is happening in Africa is actually very good for Ukraine. And again, I do not support those Azavat forces. Their enemies also could be, but they are the enemies of Russians, which is good for this moment. And the Russians are also telling that those could be Ukrainian special forces who are also fighting against Russian Wagner or ex-Wagner soldiers or new soldiers who are mercenaries. But I would say that Ukraine may share some of the intelligence information against Russian mercenaries. I wouldn't be surprised about it. Yeah, just for you to understand what is happening nowadays in Mali, where Russia completely sucks. And I gathered this information from multiple of the sources, including Russian ones. So I guess I explained everything more or less okay. Alright, what is happening in Lebanon is that Hezbollah militants, they're using drones to hit Israeli Merkava tanks. You may see one more strike, and by the way, there was the information that they've started to use fiber optic drones. Fiber optics, it was never like that before, but now they used it, and you can see the video quality, it is outstanding, and Hezbollah is getting more and more precise, hitting those Merkava tanks. At the same time, I would say that Merkava tanks are in a way better protected compared to Soviet tanks and some of the Western-made tanks because of the big, very long turret. Here you may see that the turret goes very far back and it protects the engine compartment. So drone needs to go to the very narrow gap between turret and the base, which is very difficult for the drone operator, especially, for example, for the moving vehicle or vehicle which is partially protected. So far, we don't see the anti-drone protection on Merkava tanks, but this design, I would say, it's good for protecting the engine compartment at least. And those are not my words, I took the credit from Austin Technical, who said that stuff that T-72, T-80 Leopard Abrams in Ukraine are less prompt to those drone strikes, because Merkava has a very large turret profile, appears to make it a bit more resistance to the standard FPV strike targeting engine deck. Sorry guys, I cannot show you this image fully, but there is the drone. It is flying to target Israeli militants who are evacuating their soldiers from Lebanon. They have the helicopter. We see that helicopter departed successfully, but some of the soldiers were hit by the attacking drone. So drones matter a lot, and they're visible now not just on Ukrainian front lines, but also, for example, in Lebanon. And if somehow United States would start a ground military operation in Iran, they'll face the same stuff. And Iran potentially may have more of those drones because Lebanese Hezbollah is just a proxy of Iran. So for sure, Iran has more of the resources, plus Russia may supply Iran with those drones through the Caspian Sea. So they don't need to cross through some of the other country to get those supplements. And this picture of the Flight Radar 24 shows us the airlift cargo being delivered to the military bases of the United States in the Middle East. It means that actually United States are getting ready for renewal of the military action. It doesn't matter what they say on tweets, in official statements, we need to judge the real action, and action is happening like that for several days in consecutive. And judging on this situation, I would bet on renewal of the military campaign of the United States Army with a new force. But whether it's going to be a ground operation, I don't know, but without it, the Strait of Hormuz could be blocked for a very long time. And by the way, the ground operation doesn't guarantee the success of unblocking the strait. So guys, it's all what I want to say for today, and please support my job on Patreon. The link for it is in the video description right below. You may also join membership of the channel by pressing button join. Because of your support, my job is really possible. Thank you so much. And also please don't forget to press like to this video and subscribe for the channel to boost my content in algorithms. Thank you guys. You're awesome, and I wish you all a peaceful sky wherever you are, and have a great time.